The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III stood by his office window, watching the changing of the guards ceremony below. The crisp autumn air carried with it the weight of a decision that would soon shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. What had started as a routine discussion about royal duties had evolved into something far more significant, something that would challenge decades of established protocol and send shockwaves through the palace walls. Charles had been king for just over 2 years, but already the complexities of his role were becoming increasingly apparent. Unlike his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, who had ruled with unwavering consistency for over 70 years, Charles found himself navigating uncharted waters in a rapidly changing world. The public's expectations had shifted, media scrutiny had intensified, and, within the palace itself, tensions were brewing that threatened to overshadow his reign. The relationship between his wife, Queen Camilla, and his daughter-in-law, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had always been cordial on the surface. Both women understood their roles within the royal hierarchy and had maintained a professional relationship that served the crown well. Camilla, having finally achieved the acceptance she had long sought after years of public criticism following Diana's death, had settled into her role as queen consort with dignity and grace. Catherine, meanwhile, had proven herself to be a natural royal, beloved by the public, and instrumental in modernizing the monarchy's image. However, beneath the polished exterior of royal protocol, subtle dynamics were at play that even the most seasoned palace observers had failed to fully appreciate. Charles had been watching both women carefully, noting their different approaches to royal duty, their varying levels of public support, and, most importantly, their potential to shape the future of the monarchy. What he saw in Catherine was not just a dutiful daughter-in-law, but a woman who embodied the kind of monarchy he envisioned for the future. The conversation that would change everything began on a Tuesday morning in late October. Charles had called a private meeting with his most trusted advisors, including his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, and several senior members of the royal household. The agenda was ostensibly about upcoming state visits and the distribution of royal patronages, but Charles had a much more significant matter on his mind. Sir Clive had served the royal family for decades and prided himself on his ability to anticipate the monarch's needs and concerns. However, when Charles began outlining his thoughts about the future direction of the monarchy, even this seasoned courtier found himself taken aback. The king spoke passionately about the need for the royal family to connect more deeply with younger generations, to embrace modernization while maintaining tradition, and to ensure that the most effective and popular members of the family were positioned to lead this transformation. The discussion initially centered around the success of various royal engagements and public appearances over the past year. Charles noted that Catherine's visits to schools, hospitals, and community centers consistently generated positive media coverage and genuine public enthusiasm. Her early childhood development initiatives had gained international recognition, and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life was undeniable. In contrast, while Camilla performed her duties competently, her public appearances often generated more modest responses, and certain segments of the population remained resistant to fully embracing her as queen. As the meeting progressed, Charles began to articulate a vision that would fundamentally alter the traditional hierarchy within the royal family. He spoke about the importance of positioning the monarchy for long-term success, arguing that decisions made today would determine the institution's relevance and survival for generations to come. The king emphasized that personal feelings and established protocols should not override practical considerations about what was best for the crown and the British people. The advisors exchanged glances as they began to understand the direction of Charles's thinking. Sir Clive, ever the diplomat, raised concerns about the potential complications of altering established precedents. The queen consort's role had been clearly defined, and any significant changes to royal hierarchy would require careful consideration of constitutional implications and public perception. However, Charles seemed to have already given these matters considerable thought. The king explained that he had been observing public sentiment and analyzing polling data that consistently showed Catherine's approval ratings significantly higher than Camilla's. More importantly, Catherine represented the future of the monarchy in a way that resonated with younger demographics who would ultimately determine the institution's long-term viability. He argued that the royal family needed to be pragmatic about leveraging its most popular and effective members, even if this meant making difficult decisions about traditional roles and expectations. Over the following days, Charles continued to refine his thinking, consulting with constitutional experts and trusted friends outside the palace. The more he considered the matter, the more convinced he became that bold action was necessary. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years by adapting to changing circumstances, and he believed this moment required another significant adaptation. The king's contemplation was influenced by several recent events that had crystallized his thinking. During a state visit from the President of France, Catherine's sophisticated handling of diplomatic protocols and her genuine warmth with foreign dignitaries had impressed everyone present. International media coverage had focused extensively on her grace and intelligence, with many outlets noting her growing stature on the world stage. In contrast, Camilla's role during the same visit, while perfectly adequate, had generated relatively little positive attention. Furthermore, Charles had received feedback from various Commonwealth leaders who consistently praised Catherine's contributions to royal tours and state occasions. Her ability to connect with diverse cultures and her genuine interest in global issues had made her an invaluable diplomatic asset. Several heads of government had privately commented to Charles about Catherine's effectiveness as a royal representative, noting her natural ability to bridge cultural divides and generate goodwill for Britain. The king also considered the internal dynamics of palace life that were invisible to the public, but crucial to the functioning of the royal household. Catherine had demonstrated remarkable skill in managing complex family relationships while maintaining her own distinct identity and priorities. Her relationship with William was clearly a partnership of equals, and together they had shown an ability to modernize royal traditions without abandoning their essential character. Perhaps most significantly, Charles recognized that Catherine's approach to royal duty aligned closely with his own vision for the monarchy's future. She understood the importance of using royal platforms to address serious social issues while maintaining the dignity and mystique that made the monarchy special. Her work on mental health awareness, early childhood development, and environmental conservation demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of how modern royalty could contribute meaningfully to society. As October drew to a close, Charles made a decision that would surprise everyone around him. He would restructure certain aspects of royal protocol and precedents in ways that would elevate Catherine's role and influence within the royal family. This decision was not made lightly or out of any personal animosity toward Camilla, whom he loved and respected. Rather, it represented a calculated strategic choice about how to position the monarchy for maximum effectiveness and public support. The king began by scheduling individual meetings with various family members to discuss his evolving thoughts about royal roles and responsibilities. These conversations were carefully orchestrated to prepare the ground for the more significant changes he was contemplating. Charles was acutely aware that his decision would be controversial and potentially hurtful to Camilla, but he believed the long-term interests of the crown required difficult choices. During a private dinner at Clarence House, Charles broached the subject with William and Catherine directly. He spoke about his observations of Catherine's growing influence and effectiveness, praising her natural diplomatic skills and her ability to embody the kind of modern monarchy he envisioned. William listened carefully, understanding that his father was building towards something significant, but uncertain about the specific direction of his thinking. Catherine, characteristically thoughtful and measured in her response, acknowledged the king's confidence in her abilities while expressing her commitment to supporting the royal family in whatever way would be most helpful. She had always been careful to respect established hierarchies and protocols, and She wanted to ensure that any changes would be implemented in ways that strengthened rather than divided the family. The conversation continued late into the evening, with Charles outlining his vision for a more dynamic and responsive monarchy that could effectively address the challenges of the 21st century. He spoke about the importance of positioning the most capable and popular family members in roles where they could maximize their positive impact, even if this meant departing from traditional precedents. As autumn turned to winter, rumors began circulating within palace circles about potential changes to royal protocols and responsibilities. Staff members noticed subtle shifts in meeting schedules and decision-making processes that suggested significant developments were under consideration. However, the true scope and nature of Charles's plans remained closely guarded secrets known only to a small circle of trusted advisors. The king spent considerable time during this period consulting with constitutional scholars and royal historians to ensure that any changes he implemented would be legally sound and historically justified. He studied precedents from previous reigns where monarchs had made bold decisions to adapt the institution to changing circumstances, drawing inspiration from examples of successful royal innovation throughout British history. Charles also began reaching out to key political figures and public opinion leaders to gauge their thoughts about potential changes to royal protocols. While he could not reveal his specific intentions, he sought to understand how various constituencies might respond to significant modifications in traditional royal hierarchies. The feedback he received was generally supportive of the idea that the monarchy should evolve to remain relevant and effective. Throughout this period, both Camilla and Catherine continued their royal duties without any awareness of the dramatic changes being contemplated. Camilla maintained her regular schedule of engagements, focusing particularly on her advocacy for literacy and domestic violence awareness. Catherine continued her own busy program of activities, balancing her royal responsibilities with her role as a mother to 3 young children. The contrast between the two women's public personas became increasingly apparent as Charles paid closer attention to media coverage and public reactions to their respective activities. Catherine's events consistently generated enthusiastic crowds and positive media coverage, while Camilla's engagements, though professionally executed, attracted more modest public attention. This difference in public response reinforced Charles's growing conviction that the monarchy needed to leverage its most popular and effective representatives more strategically. As December approached, Charles began finalizing his plans for what would become one of the most surprising decisions of his reign. The announcement he was preparing would challenge traditional expectations about royal hierarchy and demonstrate his commitment to positioning the monarchy for long-term success. The decision would favor Catherine's growing influence within the royal family, while necessarily diminishing some aspects of Camilla's traditional role as queen consort. The stage was now set for a revelation that would stun palace insiders, surprise the British public, and establish Charles as a monarch willing to make difficult decisions in service of the crown's future effectiveness and relevance. The first week of December brought an unexpected chill to London, and, with it, the beginning of what palace staff would later describe as the most tension-filled period in recent royal history. King Charles had finalized his decision, but the process of implementing it would prove far more complex and emotionally charged than even he had anticipated. The careful balance he had maintained for months between contemplation and action was about to shift dramatically toward execution. The initial step in Charles's plan involved a series of private conversations with key family members, beginning with a meeting with Prince William that would set the tone for everything that followed. The king requested William's presence at Windsor Castle on a cold Tuesday morning, ostensibly for a routine discussion about upcoming royal tours. However, when William arrived at the king's private study, he found his father in an unusually serious and reflective mood. Charles began the conversation by discussing the broader challenges facing the monarchy in an era of rapid social change and evolving public expectations. He spoke about the need for strategic thinking about how to position the royal family for maximum effectiveness and relevance in the decades to come. William listened attentively, recognizing that his father was building towards something significant but still uncertain about the specific direction of his thinking. When Charles finally revealed his intentions regarding Catherine's elevated role within the royal family, William's reaction was a complex mixture of surprise, concern, and cautious pride. As Catherine's husband, he naturally felt pleased that his father recognized her exceptional contributions to the royal family and her growing popularity with the British public. However, he also understood the potential complications and sensitivities that would arise from any significant alteration to established royal protocols. William's primary concern centered on the impact such changes might have on family relationships, particularly with regard to Camilla, whom he had come to respect and appreciate over the years. Despite the complicated history surrounding Camilla's relationship with his mother, William had developed a cordial relationship with his stepmother and recognized her genuine commitment to her royal duties. He worried that Charles's decision, however well-intentioned, might create unnecessary friction within the family. The king acknowledged William's concerns while emphasizing that his decision was based on practical considerations about what would be best for the monarchy's future rather than any personal judgment about Camilla's character or capabilities. Charles explained that he had spent months analyzing public opinion data, media coverage patterns, and feedback from political leaders and Commonwealth representatives. The evidence consistently pointed toward Catherine's superior effectiveness as a royal representative and her greater potential to connect with younger generations who would determine the monarchy's long-term survival. Over the course of their 2-hour conversation, William gradually came to understand and appreciate his father's reasoning, even while maintaining some reservations about the potential consequences. Charles had clearly given the matter extensive thought and had consulted with constitutional experts to ensure that his proposed changes would be legally and historically justifiable. The king's commitment to making difficult decisions for the long-term benefit of the crown was evident, even though those decisions would inevitably be controversial. The following day, Charles arranged to meet with Catherine privately, a conversation that would prove even more delicate and consequential than his discussion with William. Catherine arrived at Buckingham Palace for what she believed would be a routine briefing about her upcoming engagements, but she quickly realized that the king had something much more significant to discuss. Charles began by expressing his genuine admiration for Catherine's contributions to the royal family over the past decade. He praised her natural grace, her sophisticated understanding of royal protocol, and her exceptional ability to connect with people from all walks of life. More importantly, he acknowledged her role in modernizing the monarchy's image while maintaining its essential dignity and tradition. When the king began to outline his vision for Catherine's expanded role within the royal hierarchy, her response was characteristically thoughtful and measured. Catherine had always been careful to respect established protocols and precedents, and she was initially concerned about the potential implications of any significant changes to traditional arrangements. She expressed particular sensitivity about how such changes might affect Camilla, whom she had always treated with appropriate respect and courtesy. Catherine's natural diplomacy and emotional intelligence became evident as she navigated this unexpected conversation. She asked thoughtful questions about the king's motivations and objectives, seeking to understand not just what he was proposing, but why he believed such changes were necessary. Her questions demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of the complex dynamics within the royal family and her genuine concern about maintaining harmony and effectiveness. The king was impressed by Catherine's mature and strategic thinking about the situation. Rather than being overwhelmed by the prospect of increased responsibilities and prominence, she approached the matter with the kind of careful consideration that had characterized her approach to royal duties from the beginning. Catherine recognized that accepting an elevated role would bring increased scrutiny and pressure, but she also understood that the king's confidence in her abilities represented both an honor and a responsibility that she should not take lightly. As their conversation continued, Charles explained the specific changes he was contemplating, which would involve Catherine taking on certain ceremonial and diplomatic functions that had traditionally been associated with the queen consort's role. These changes would not eliminate Camilla's position, but would redistribute certain high-profile responsibilities in ways that leverage Catherine's particular strengths and public appeal. Catherine requested time to discuss the matter with William and to consider the full implications of what the king was proposing. Charles agreed, understanding that such a significant decision required careful thought and family consultation. However, he also made clear that his own mind was made up and that he intended to move forward with the changes in the coming weeks. The period following these initial conversations was marked by intense behind-the-scenes activity as various family members and palace staff began to understand the scope of the changes being contemplated. Sir Clive Alderton found himself in the challenging position of developing implementation strategies for decisions that departed significantly from established precedents. His experience and diplomatic skills would be crucial in managing the complex logistics and potential resistance that such changes might generate. Meanwhile, rumors about significant developments within the royal family began circulating among the palace staff and eventually reached the ears of royal correspondents who had cultivated sources within the royal household. The secrecy surrounding the king's plans only intensified speculation about what might be developing behind the palace walls. The most delicate aspect of the entire situation remained the question of how and when to inform Camilla about the changes being planned. Charles understood that this conversation would be the most difficult and potentially hurtful part of the entire process. Camilla had worked hard to establish herself in her role as queen consort, overcoming decades of public criticism and skepticism to achieve a level of acceptance and respect that had seemed impossible during the early years of her relationship with Charles. The king spent considerable time planning his approach to this conversation, consulting with trusted advisors about how to present his decision in ways that would minimize hurt feelings while making clear that his choice was final and non-negotiable. Charles genuinely loved and respected Camilla, and he had no desire to cause her unnecessary pain or embarrassment. However, he also believed that his responsibilities as king required him to make decisions based on what was best for the monarchy rather than what was most comfortable for individual family members. The conversation with Camilla finally took place on a gray December morning at Clarence House, in the same comfortable sitting room where Charles had first outlined his evolving thoughts to William and Catherine weeks earlier. Camilla arrived expecting a pleasant discussion about their upcoming Christmas plans and their schedule for the new year. She had no idea that her husband was about to fundamentally alter her role within the royal family. Charles began the conversation by reaffirming his love and appreciation for Camilla as both his wife and his partner in royal duties. He acknowledged her dedication and professionalism in carrying out her responsibilities as queen consort, and emphasized that his upcoming decision was in no way a reflection of any shortcomings on her part. Rather, he explained, it represented a strategic choice about how to position the monarchy for maximum effectiveness in a changing world. When Charles finally revealed the specific changes he was planning, Camilla's reaction was a mixture of shock, hurt, and bewilderment. Despite her years of experience with royal protocol and her understanding of the practical demands of monarchy, she had not anticipated such a significant alteration to her established role. The changes would not strip her of her title or position, but they would redistribute certain high-profile responsibilities in ways that would inevitably be noticed by the public and the media. Camilla's initial response was to question whether such changes were truly necessary and whether there might be alternative approaches that could achieve the king's objectives without disrupting established arrangements. She pointed out that she had worked hard to build positive relationships with various organizations and causes that she had supported as queen consort, and she was concerned about the message that such changes might send about the stability and continuity of royal patronages. Charles listened patiently to Camilla's concerns while maintaining his position that the changes were both necessary and beneficial for the long-term interests of the crown. He emphasized that the decision was based on extensive analysis of public opinion data and feedback from political and Commonwealth leaders who had consistently praised Catherine's effectiveness as a royal representative. The king made clear that while he understood Camilla's disappointment, his decision was final and would be implemented regardless of personal preferences or comfort levels. The conversation continued for over an hour, with Camilla gradually coming to understand the reasoning behind Charles's decision, even while remaining hurt and confused by the unexpected nature of the changes. Her years of experience with royal life had taught her that personal feelings often had to be subordinated to the greater interests of a monarchy, but that knowledge did not make the current situation any less difficult or emotionally challenging. As December progressed, the atmosphere within the royal family became increasingly tense as various members struggled to adjust to the new reality that Charles's decision had created. Staff members noticed subtle changes in the dynamics between family members, and even the most routine interactions seemed charged with an underlying tension that had not previously existed. Catherine found herself in the particularly difficult position of accepting increased responsibilities and prominence while trying to maintain positive relationships with all family members, especially Camilla. Her natural diplomacy and emotional intelligence proved invaluable during this period, as she worked to demonstrate that her elevated role would not come at the expense of respect and consideration for established family relationships. The final weeks of December were consumed with detailed planning for the public announcement of the king's decision, which would need to be carefully orchestrated to maximize understanding and minimize controversy. Palace communication staff worked overtime to develop messaging strategies that would emphasize the positive aspects of the changes while addressing potential criticisms and concerns. Charles remained confident in his decision despite the family tensions it had created. He believed that history would vindicate his choice to prioritize the monarchy's effectiveness and public appeal over personal comfort and traditional arrangements. The announcement that would soon shock the British public and the international media was the culmination of months of careful thought and strategic planning, representing Charles's commitment to adapting the monarchy for the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. The announcement that would reshape the British royal family came on a crisp January morning, delivered with the formal precision that had characterized royal communications for centuries, yet carrying implications that were anything but traditional. King Charles had chosen to reveal his decision through a carefully orchestrated series of statements and briefings that would unfold over several hours, allowing the British public and international observers to gradually absorb the magnitude of the changes he was implementing. The first indication that something extraordinary was developing came at 7 o'clock in the morning, when palace press officers began contacting major media outlets to advise them that His Majesty will be making a significant announcement regarding royal duties and protocols later that day. The carefully worded advance notice was deliberately vague, mentioning only that the king would be addressing matters related to the modernization and optimization of royal responsibilities in service of the crown and the British people. Royal correspondents who had spent years cultivating sources within the palace immediately began working their contacts, seeking any advance intelligence about what might be coming. However, Charles and his communications team had maintained extraordinary secrecy around the announcement, limiting knowledge of the specific details to a small circle of trusted advisors who understood the sensitive nature of what was being planned. The formal announcement came at 11 o'clock, released simultaneously through official palace channels and delivered in person by the king's private secretary at a hastily arranged briefing for senior royal correspondents. The statement was crafted with the diplomatic language characteristic of royal communications, but its substance was unmistakably revolutionary in the context of established royal protocol. The king's statement began by reaffirming his commitment to ensuring that the monarchy remained relevant, effective, and responsive to the needs of the British people in the 21st century. Charles emphasized that this commitment required periodic reassessment of how royal duties and responsibilities were allocated, with the goal of positioning the most capable and popular members of the royal family in roles where they could maximize their positive impact. The specific changes announced were carefully framed as enhancements to existing arrangements rather than fundamental alterations, but royal observers immediately recognized their significance. Catherine, the Princess of Wales would assume primary responsibility for certain high-profile state functions and ceremonial duties that had traditionally been associated with the Queen Consort's role. These included leading certain diplomatic receptions, representing the crown at major international events, and serving as the primary royal patron for several prestigious organizations. Simultaneously, Queen Camilla's role would be refocused and refined to emphasize her particular areas of expertise and interest, including her advocacy work on literacy, domestic violence prevention, and support for military families. The statement praised Camilla's dedication and professionalism while making clear that the redistribution of responsibilities was intended to optimize the effectiveness of royal representation rather than reflect any deficiency in her performance. The immediate reaction to the announcement was a mixture of shock, confusion, and intense speculation about the motivations behind such an unprecedented decision. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for decades struggled to find historical precedents for a reigning monarch voluntarily redistributing traditional responsibilities between his wife and his daughter-in-law in favor of the latter. British newspapers, already preparing their morning editions when the announcement was made, scrambled to revise their front pages and provide analysis of what the changes might mean for the future of the monarchy. The Times led with a headline reading, "King Charles reshapes royal hierarchy in favor of Catherine," while the Daily Mail opted for the more dramatic palace revolution. Charles chooses Kate over Camilla. Television news programs interrupted their regular programming to provide coverage of the announcement, with royal experts and constitutional scholars offering immediate commentary on the implications of the king's decision. The overwhelming consensus among these observers was that Charles had made a bold and risky choice that could either strengthen the monarchy's position or create lasting divisions within the royal family. Social media platforms exploded with commentary and speculation as millions of people around the world reacted to news of the royal shakeup. Public opinion appeared to be sharply divided, with many expressing support for Catherine's elevated role, while others criticized what they perceived as unfair treatment of Queen Camilla. Hashtags related to the announcement quickly began trending globally, reflecting the intense international interest in British royal affairs. Within the palace walls, the atmosphere was tense and uncertain as staff members struggled to understand the practical implications of the changes for their daily responsibilities. Many long-serving members of the royal household had built their careers around supporting established protocols and procedures, and they now faced the challenge of adapting to new arrangements that had no clear precedent in modern royal history. The royal family's public response to the announcement was carefully coordinated to present a united front despite the underlying tensions that Charles's decision had created. Both Catherine and Camilla issued statements expressing their commitment to serving the crown and the British people in their respective roles, emphasizing their mutual respect and their shared dedication to the institution of monarchy. Catherine's statement was particularly notable for its gracious acknowledgement of the honor and responsibility that her expanded role represented, while also paying tribute to Queen Camilla's contributions to the royal family. The Princess of Wales emphasized that she viewed her new responsibilities as an extension of her existing commitment to royal service, rather than as a replacement or substitution for anyone else's contributions. Camilla's response demonstrated her characteristic dignity and professionalism, expressing her continued enthusiasm for her advocacy work and her support for the king's vision of a modernized monarchy. However, close observers noted subtle signs of the strain that the situation had created, including her absence from several public engagements in the days following the announcement. The international reaction to Charles's decision was equally intense, with royal families and government leaders around the world watching carefully to see how the British monarchy would navigate this unprecedented situation. Commonwealth nations, in particular, paid close attention to the changes, given Catherine's growing role in diplomatic relations and her popularity during recent royal tours. Political leaders in Britain initially maintained diplomatic silence about the royal announcement, recognizing that constitutional convention prevented them from commenting directly on internal royal family matters. However, private conversations between government officials and palace representatives revealed concerns about potential public relations challenges and the need to ensure that the changes did not undermine the monarchy's constitutional role. The weeks following the announcement were marked by intense media scrutiny of every aspect of the royal family's public appearances and private interactions. Royal correspondents analyzed body language, seating arrangements, and speaking orders at public events, searching for signs of tension or discord that might indicate how the family was adjusting to the new arrangements. Catherine's first major public appearance following the announcement came at a state dinner for visiting German dignitaries, where she assumed several ceremonial functions that had previously been performed by Queen Camilla. Her performance was widely praised for its grace and sophistication, with many observers noting her apparent comfort with her expanded responsibilities and her natural diplomatic skills. The German chancellor, who had interacted with both Catherine and Camilla during previous state visits, privately commented to her staff that Catherine's elevated role seemed to enhance the overall effectiveness of British diplomatic hospitality. Such feedback reinforced Charles's conviction that his decision was already producing the positive results he had anticipated. Meanwhile, Camilla's adjusted role allowed her to focus more intensively on her advocacy work, and she threw herself into these activities with renewed energy and determination. Her appearances at literacy events and domestic violence awareness campaigns demonstrated her continued commitment to making a positive impact, even within the constraints of her revised responsibilities. Behind the scenes, palace staff worked diligently to establish new protocols and procedures that would accommodate the changed dynamics within the royal family. These adjustments required careful coordination between different departments and households, as traditional lines of authority and responsibility had been fundamentally altered by the king's decision. The challenge of managing public perception became a full-time occupation for palace communications staff, who found themselves responding to constant media speculation about family relationships and the long-term implications of the changes. Every public interaction between Catherine and Camilla was scrutinized for signs of tension or harmony, creating pressure on both women to maintain perfect composure in all circumstances. Charles himself remained largely above the fray, appearing confident and decisive in his public appearances while maintaining his regular schedule of engagements and official duties. The king's demeanor suggested that he was satisfied with his decision and prepared to weather any short-term controversy in service of what he believed were the monarchy's long-term interests. Private polling data commissioned by palace advisors indicated that public opinion about the changes was evolving in complex ways. While Catherine's popularity remained consistently high and many people supported her expanded role, there was also sympathy for Camilla and criticism of what some perceived as unnecessary disruption to established arrangements. The monarchy's international reputation appeared to be largely unaffected by the changes, with most foreign observers viewing Charles's decision as evidence of his commitment to maintaining the crown's effectiveness and relevance. However, some traditional monarchist organizations expressed concerns about precedent and the potential for future monarchs to make similarly dramatic changes to established protocols. As winter turned to spring, the full implications of Charles's decision continued to unfold, with new challenges and opportunities emerging regularly. The king had fundamentally altered the trajectory of his reign through a single bold decision, demonstrating his willingness to prioritize strategic considerations over personal comfort and traditional expectations. The ultimate success or failure of Charles's choice would likely not be determined for years or even decades, as the long-term consequences of such changes could only be evaluated over time. However, the immediate impact was undeniable. The British monarchy had been transformed in ways that would influence its character and effectiveness for generations to come, all because one king had chosen to favor capability and popularity over protocol and precedent points 6 months after the announcement that had shocked the palace and captivated the world. The true measure of King Charles's unprecedented decision was becoming clear through the accumulated evidence of countless public appearances, diplomatic encounters, and private conversations that shaped the monarchy's daily reality. The initial storm of controversy had largely subsided, replaced by a more nuanced understanding of how the redistribution of royal responsibilities was actually functioning in practice. Catherine's expanded role had evolved far beyond what even the most optimistic palace planners had originally envisioned. Her natural diplomatic abilities, enhanced by years of experience and careful training, had translated into tangible benefits for Britain's international relationships and the monarchy's global standing. Foreign ambassadors and visiting dignitaries consistently reported positive experiences with Catherine's enhanced ceremonial functions, noting her sophisticated understanding of cultural sensitivities and her ability to make genuine personal connections that transcended formal protocol. The Princess of Wales had approached her new responsibilities with the same careful preparation and attention to detail that had characterized her entire royal career. Rather than simply assuming traditional duties previously associated with the Queen Consort's role, Catherine had worked with palace advisors to develop innovative approaches that leveraged her particular strengths and interests. Her state dinner hosting duties, for example, now incorporated elements focused on her advocacy areas, creating opportunities to advance important causes while fulfilling ceremonial obligations. Perhaps most significantly, Catherine's elevated profile had coincided with measurably improved public opinion polling about the monarchy among younger demographics. Survey data collected by independent research organizations showed substantial increases in favorable attitudes toward the royal family among people under 35, with many respondents specifically citing Catherine's increased visibility and leadership as factors in their evolving perspectives about the institution. The international media coverage of Catherine's expanded role had been overwhelmingly positive, with major publications around the world praising her grace, intelligence, and effectiveness in representing British interests. Magazine covers featuring Catherine at state events and diplomatic functions had become common, and her influence on fashion and cultural trends continued to generate significant soft power benefits for Britain's global image. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla's refocused role had allowed her to make deeper and more sustained contributions to the causes she cared about most passionately. Freed from some of the more ceremonial aspects of her previous responsibilities, Camilla had been able to dedicate additional time and energy to her advocacy work on literacy, domestic violence prevention, and support for military families. Her involvement in these areas had become more substantive and impactful, leading to measurable improvements in awareness and funding for related programs. The Queen's work with literacy charities had particularly flourished during this period, with her personal involvement leading to the establishment of new reading programs in underserved communities across Britain. Camilla's genuine passion for this cause had always been evident, but her increased focus had allowed her to develop more sophisticated strategies for addressing systemic challenges and creating lasting change. Similarly, her advocacy on behalf of domestic violence survivors had evolved into a comprehensive platform that included policy recommendations, funding initiatives, and public awareness campaigns. Camilla's willingness to address difficult and sensitive topics had earned her respect from activist organizations and government officials who valued her authentic commitment to making a difference in people's lives. The personal dynamics within the royal family had also stabilized considerably since the initial period of adjustment following Charles's announcement. Both Catherine and Camilla had demonstrated remarkable professionalism and grace in navigating their changed circumstances, focusing on their respective responsibilities rather than dwelling on the disruption to traditional arrangements. Private conversations between family members, as reported by trusted palace sources, indicated that the initial tensions and uncertainties had largely resolved as everyone adapted to the new reality. William had played a crucial role in supporting both his wife and his stepmother during the transition period, using his diplomatic skills to maintain positive relationships while helping both women succeed in their evolving roles. Charles himself had emerged from the controversial period with his reputation largely intact, having demonstrated decisive leadership and strategic thinking about the monarchy's future needs. While some traditionalist critics continued to question his departure from established protocols, most observers had come to appreciate the practical benefits that his decision had generated for the institution as a whole. The king's confidence in his choice had been validated by concrete evidence of improved effectiveness in royal representation and enhanced public support for the monarchy. Private feedback from government officials, diplomatic contacts, and Commonwealth leaders consistently praised the positive impact of the changes, noting improved outcomes in various areas of royal engagement with both domestic and international audiences. One of the most significant developments during this period was Catherine's successful handling of a major diplomatic crisis that arose when trade tensions between Britain and a key Commonwealth partner threatened to escalate into a more serious political dispute. Catherine's personal relationships with leaders from the affected country, developed through her expanded diplomatic role, proved instrumental in facilitating productive dialogue and ultimately resolving the situation satisfactorily for all parties involved. The incident demonstrated the practical value of Charles's decision to elevate Catherine's profile in international relations, showing how personal diplomacy and cultural connections could complement formal governmental negotiations. Foreign policy experts noted that Catherine's involvement had been crucial in maintaining positive relationships that might otherwise have been damaged by the trade dispute. As summer approached, the anniversary of Charles's accession to the throne provided an opportunity to evaluate the overall success of his reign thus far, including the controversial restructuring of royal responsibilities. Public celebrations marking the king's second year on the throne featured prominent roles for both Catherine and Camilla, demonstrating the successful integration of their respective contributions to the monarchy's effectiveness. The anniversary events also showcased the international recognition that Catherine's expanded role had generated, with foreign media coverage focusing extensively on her growing influence and the positive impact of her diplomatic activities. Several major publications featured in-depth profiles of Catherine's evolution from a somewhat reluctant royal newcomer to a confident and sophisticated representative of British interests on the world stage. Polls conducted around the anniversary showed that public support for the monarchy had actually increased during Charles's second year as king, with many respondents specifically crediting the strategic use of Catherine's popularity and capabilities as a factor in their positive assessment. The data suggested that Charles's gamble on prioritizing effectiveness over tradition had resonated with significant portions of the British public. Behind the scenes, palace planning was already underway for the next phase of Catherine's role expansion, with discussions about additional responsibilities and opportunities that would further leverage her proven capabilities. These conversations reflected the palace's recognition that the initial changes had been so successful that additional evolution might be beneficial for the monarchy's continued modernization and effectiveness. The long-term implications of Charles's decision were still unfolding, but the evidence from the first year of implementation suggested that his strategic calculation had been largely correct. The monarchy had successfully adapted to changing circumstances while maintaining its essential character and dignity, demonstrating the institution's continued capacity for evolution and renewal. Critics who had initially predicted disaster or lasting family divisions had been largely proved wrong, as the royal family had shown remarkable resilience and adaptability in adjusting to their new arrangements. The professionalism and mutual respect demonstrated by all parties had helped ensure that the changes strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy's overall effectiveness. As the first anniversary of the announcement approached, Charles could reflect on a decision that had initially seemed risky, but had ultimately proven to be one of the most successful strategic choices of his reign. The king had demonstrated that effective leadership sometimes required difficult decisions that prioritized long-term institutional health over short-term comfort and tradition. The transformation of royal responsibilities had created a more dynamic and responsive monarchy that was better positioned to address the challenges and opportunities of the modern world. Catherine's elevated role had proven to be a significant asset for British diplomacy and public relations, while Camilla's refocused activities had allowed her to make more meaningful contributions to causes she genuinely cared about. Looking toward the future, the precedent established by Charles's bold decision would likely influence how subsequent monarchs approach questions of royal responsibility and effectiveness. The successful restructuring had demonstrated that the monarchy could evolve and adapt without losing its essential character, providing a model for future innovations and improvements. The story of Charles's shocking choice to favor Catherine over Camilla had ultimately become a story of successful institutional adaptation and strategic leadership. What had initially appeared to be a controversial departure from tradition had revealed itself to be a thoughtful and effective response to changing circumstances, ensuring that the British monarchy would continue to serve its constitutional role while remaining relevant and respected in an evolving world. The king's willingness to make difficult decisions based on practical considerations rather than personal preferences had established him as a monarch capable of providing the kind of strategic leadership that would be necessary for the crown's continued success in the 21st century. His shocking choice had indeed stunned the palace, but it had also strengthened the institution he had sworn to serve and protect.